Thank you very much. And I'd just like to start off by saying a huge thank you to the organizers for inviting me to speak today, because it really is a pleasure, an honor, and just really quite emotional for me to be sharing my journey of living with HIV here today for over 30 years on Kenyan soil. So thank you very much for the invitation. So you've already heard a little bit about me, founder member Forum Network. Forum stands for My Health, My Choice, My Child, My Life. It is a perinatal peer mentoring project working with mentor mothers living with HIV to support them around supporting their peers, but also for their own personal development. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. This is a small forum team. Today I'm going to share with you my personal journey of living with HIV. So, 56 years ago, I was born in Machakos, which is a town here in eastern Kenya. And in my early years, I spent living around lots of different towns because my mother was a prison social worker. And so we used to move, she was transferred a lot to the different towns in Kenya where there were prisons. So a few years later, my mother moved to study in the UK. So she went to Wales, University of Swansea. And we were then sent to live with my dad in Tanzania. They had separated many years ago, but that's another story for another day. In 1978, when the East African community broke up, we moved back to live in Kenya and settled in Mombasa. And so I went to primary school there, and then I went to secondary school at Star of the Sea High School. And then I moved back to eastern Kenya, a town called Kitui, to do my A-levels in Mulango Girls High School. Then I came back to Mombasa. We moved around quite a lot. I'm quite a nomad. Came back to Mombasa, and after 2 years, I worked at the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute as an information officer. After a couple of years, Mom said, you better come back and finish your university. So I went to join her in London, where she was now working as a social worker. And then I went to university in the University of Manchester. 6 months after my graduation, I was diagnosed with HIV. As you can imagine, it was quite a traumatic time for me. It was in those early days that Professor Bukusi mentioned, where we didn't have treatment. And all that doctors could do was provide palliative care for people living with HIV. So quite a tough time for me. However, 3 things helped me to cope really well back then. The first thing that helped me to cope was the fact that I got access to peer support very earlier on. Just out of the blue, one of my friends told me, oh, Angelina, I have something to tell you. And she proceeded to tell me I have HIV. And then I went, yes. Not because she had HIV, but just because here was another woman living with HIV in London, and she's a friend of mine. So she did a great thing for me and took me to a peer support group where I met 5 other women living with HIV, who for me gave me the drive to continue living. So that's the first thing that helped me to cope. The second thing that helped me to cope was because I'd finished uni and I was looking for work, I got offered a job in almost the same week that I was diagnosed. And so I thought, oh, I might as well take the job whilst I'm waiting to die. And with hindsight, that was one of the best decisions I made back then. The third thing that helped me to cope back then was, I think, my attitude and the fact that I decided to start volunteering in the HIV sector after I'd kind of coped with my own diagnosis. And then I changed career and started working at Positively Women in 1996. That was me on the helpline, working with women and families living with HIV. And as you can appreciate, during those early days, we worked with so many women who are experiencing a lot of stigma. Lots of families are experiencing stigma. And so having worked in the sector for, I don't know, some 20, I think 26, I stopped counting at some point because then it shows my age, my real age. I have come across, I've seen firsthand the impact that stigma can have on the lives of people living with HIV, and that's already been alluded to earlier on this morning. Quite simply, we know that stigma kills communities. Stigma prevents people from testing for HIV. Stigma prevents people from talking about HIV. And stigma prevents people from telling significant others about their HIV status. So what it does is then it leads to people having low self-esteem, not engaging in services, or falling out of care, particularly when they're not being treated so well within the services. But you know, that's the not so good news about stigma. I always like to focus on the good news too. There are a lot of things that we can do in order to address or challenge stigma. What do? I do lots of things. I speak publicly about living with HIV, which is why I'm here today. But I'm aware of the fact that I can stand up and speak publicly about living with HIV because I have a home to go to, and I have friends who can give me food if I don't have a meal. But I'm acutely aware of the fact that there are many women out there who are not able to be open about their status, because being open about their status is the difference between having a home or not, or being alive or not. So I do that, and I believe that those of us who can should. One of the other things I do is around using innovative ways to share the good news, or the fact that HIV has changed. And one of the things I do is to make U equals U t-shirts. You'll notice that I created this dress just as a way of a talking point. I don't have to do a whole PowerPoint presentations about U equals U. Somebody asks me what it is, I'll explain that this is what it is. Somebody living with HIV, taking their medication, achieving and maintaining an undetectable viral load, which means that your HIV is well controlled, cannot pass HIV on to a significant partner or an unborn child. And I think that's absolutely an amazing thing, and it should be, many people should know about it. So that's one of the things that I do. But also importantly, there are things that individuals living with HIV and society can do in order to address stigma. For us individuals living with HIV, we need the knowledge, we need the will, and we need the power. We need the knowledge to change the way we see HIV. It is a tiny virus. It doesn't define who we are. We need the knowledge to change the language that we use around HIV, because the language that we use also is often stigmatizing. You often hear people talking about, have you disclosed to your partner? The term disclosure itself is heavy, it's loaded, it's legal. Instead of using disclosure, I don't know of any words that start with dis that are good, apart from disco. Disco is a very good word. We can just use telling, talking, sharing. You're saying the same thing, but in a completely different way. Other times we tend to use a lot of things like mother-to-child transmission. I know that is what the reality is, but actually if we use vertical transmission, then we're focusing on the actual event rather than putting the blame and onus on the mother. So just a few terms that we can change how we use, and it just makes a huge difference. We also need the will to access information, treatment, and services, and to stay engaged in care. But you also need the power to kick stigma out of our lives. I always say to women, if you tell somebody I have HIV and they don't like you, ask yourself 3 questions. Do they pay my rent? Do they pay my bills? Do they feed me? Do they feed my children? If they don't, then actually you don't need them in your life. But this is something that people can do when they've got the confidence and the support behind them. But it's always important to remember that we are more than HIV. So as a society, and this includes governments, faith communities, it includes political leaders, it includes so many of us, the media, what we can do, instead of spreading fear about HIV, instead we need to start spreading the real facts about how HIV has changed from those early days. So, as a woman of maturing age, as you can imagine, I do have other comorbidities, and I have to take medication to control my high blood pressure, to keep my osteoporosis at bay, you name it, so many other things. But I wanted to just take a few minutes to share with you my journey of taking HIV treatments over the years. And I tend to describe my journey of taking treatments over the many, many years as kind of like the relationships that you have with a partner or a lover over the course of your life. So I'm going to focus on just a few significant relationships that I've had over the course of my diagnosis. My first very significant relationship with treatment was during pregnancy. And this is kind of like the first relationship that you have. You really want it to work. You'll do anything to stay in this relationship. So that was when I took medication during pregnancy. The magazine below is just, I was such a great patient. I took my medication religiously. If the doctors had told me that if you stand on your head throughout your pregnancy, that is how you'll prevent passing HIV onto your child, I would have done it. So I did a pregnancy journey, week-by-week diary. It's on our website. You can have a read later. My next significant relationship was my third relationship with treatment, and that is a time when I joined a clinical trial because the medication I was taking then wasn't working very well. So it was a trial called Pivot, which was comparing monotherapy versus triple combination therapy for people who are already suppressed. And I was randomized into the monotherapy arm, but later on moved to take the triple combination therapy. And then the next relationship I'm going to focus on will be my 5th relationship, and I call it my one-night stand. This is when I was a long-term patient in hospital. I was in for 6 months, and I had to have an op, and they were giving me steroids, and then the steroid was going to react with the medication that I was taking, so they just stopped my ARVs for a short time. Then after I was discharged, I moved on to my 6th relationship. I've had quite a few partners in my life. And that was then, by then treatment has significantly changed. I was on a 1 pill a day. It was working very well. So I took that for a while, but although it was working well, no side effects, I was always open to, like, if a better looking partner came along, I was going to ditch the one I was on. And that is exactly what happened last year. Long-acting injectables became available to me, and I started taking them. So I ditched my partner. And I'm hoping that this, which I'm taking now, is going to be my forever stay-together partner. So my last slide, I talked about how I coped then when there was no treatment and those people were dying, and all we could do is just look after each other. How do I cope now? Well, I follow the 5 steps, very simply, the 5 steps to well-being. And the first one is about giving. I volunteer once a week to the Mild Mission Hospital. When I was an inpatient for 6 months, I spent the last 3 or so months at the hospice. And so I go there once a week and I do bits and pieces. The second step to well-being is being active. I do try and swim once a week, but I'm also more active within the choir. This is a photograph of the Joyful Noise Choir. It is a choir of people living with HIV, and we just go and sing. It's a music therapy choir. You don't need to talk about HIV when you're there, and you don't need to sing very well, because I can only sing karaoke, by the way. So we go and sing and get together, and it's just a really feel-good, a really great way of therapy, being active. The third step to well-being is connecting with others, and I connect with lots of friends. This is a photograph of a group of us women living with HIV. We get together once a year and have a wonderful barbecue. Lots of ideas have been hatched at those annual barbecues. Of course, I only go for the nyama choma and the prosecco. And then the 4th step to well-being is I keep learning. And I just wanted to share very quickly, this is a book that my friends, all 5 women living with HIV, we got together and we wrote this book. It's called Our Stories, Celebrating the African Contribution to the UK HIV Response. The reason we wrote this book is because we wanted to tell our stories in our words, because oftentimes all you hear about African people living with HIV is the negative, is the statistics. You never hear about the leadership, the contribution, the wonderful things that people have done over the years. The book has got contributions of 40 people living with HIV, as well as our allies, because the response has not been fought just by people living with HIV. It has been a partnership with clinicians, with researchers, with governments, etc. And the last point is around the step to well-being, is I take notice of what's around me. I am going through my menopause, but one of the things is around making sure that I get support around it. We don't talk a lot about menopause, but this is a wonderful project called Bearded and Flashed, where we got together and did creative writing around living with HIV and the menopause, so taking a fun and irreverent look at the menopause in a different way. So last but by no means least, if you haven't had anything I've said, if you don't remember anything, I just want to give you 3 takeaways to go home with. So, number 1, with access to treatment, care, and support, people living with HIV can lead fulfilling lives, have relationships and children, if that's what they wish, study and work, and if they're given the opportunity to do so. Number 2, treating people living with HIV with empathy, understanding, and respect can go a long way in improving our quality of life. And number 3, when all is said and done, and particularly women living with HIV, are just like you and me. We are sisters, we are friends, we are lovers, we are taxpayers, yeah? We're just like you and me. Asanteni sana kwa kunisikiliza, and for the 9 Kiswahili speakers, that means thank you very much for listening to me.